To be able to cut imperial threads on this lathe, I need to install a 120 teeth gear in here that I don't have. So let's make one. Now this is a piece of an I-beam that maybe you have seen in previous videos. And I'm gonna use this one, cut it in two and make my new gear in two halves, because the thickness I need of the gear is 18 millimeter. That of course I don't have. But if I make two rounds out of this thing here and then I put them together, I have a total thickness of more or less 20 millimeter. So all I have to do is to cut off. So I suppose first thing to do to start this project is to cut this thing in two. And then of course drill some holes in the two halves I just created. So I can fix them here on the shaper. And this is also where I see my first little problem. Of course I fixed them on the shaper to cut off this leftover of this beam thing here. But that is not a problem at all. The problem is that this face is in a bow, it's concave. And this is also where I run in the second problem. But this one is more serious. To set the stroke, of course I always run the machine by hand. And as you see, it's really easy. Even with the brake on, without brake it's easier. But when I come over here, the thing blocks. And I can clearly hear some kind of click inside here. That's not good. Okay, I just fixed the shaper, ready to go again. Now what was happening is that this little plate that sits on top of the bull gear in here, that plate to distribute the oil on the yoke mechanism, that little plate for I don't know what reason was touching the rocker arm. And the only way to figure that out was of course to move the ram completely backwards, take off the slide here, and then with my little flashlight that I have since this afternoon, I could barely see a tiny little bit what was happening in here. But luckily there's just enough room to pass with this little bar here, and I gave it a fine light touch of hammer and I could bend the little plate downwards, and now it's fixed. Back in action, and the knocking sound is back too. Alright. Now here we can clearly see that the middle part here is higher than here and here. So it has a bow in this direction and a bow in this direction. And this side is higher than this side. Because this plate has a bow in it, and when I tighten my 4 little bolts here on the shaper table, I pull it out a bit. Of course, after releasing, if I make a nice and flat surface here, it will be a bow again. So I'm gonna stop using the shaper and I will go and use the milling machine. Because here I can install my part held down just only on the 4 corners. Now this is the other plate, as you can see it's not cut yet. I installed it while shaping the other one, and this one has also a little twist in it, a tiny bit. So the plan is to leave the bow as is, and I will create here as big as possible flat surface, and on the other one too, and then bring my 2 parts together. Let's do this. Alright, on both parts there is a little bit of rim left that didn't clean up. And also on both parts on this side there was a higher rim, but I took it off with the angle grinder and now it seems to fit. Of course there is still a little bit of wiggle in it, but not much. Right, next thing to do is here in the center bore a hole of 28 millimeters. This should be it. But just to be sure, I have to take my lathe apart to test fit. To do my test fit, of course I need to take out this key. And I tried and it doesn't want to come without violence, so I'm gonna leave it in. But because there's this little rim here, I can do a tiny test fit and it seems to work. I installed my 2 parts, because for the moment it's still 2. Here on the shaper to cut the keyway, because of course this little shaft and the key has to fit completely. So let's do this. And this should be it. Yes. The next step is to make an arbor that fits in here, of course, so I can hold all these things together and then put it in a milling machine on the dividing head, so I can drill holes and put bolts to hold these two plates together. And of course also use the same arbor to put the thing in the lathe to make it circular. Because I could maybe use this one, but this is an original lathe part and I don't like to mess it up. So a new one it will be. But before I can use the lathe, of course, I have to reassemble it. It is a tight fit. What's happening here? I will and bring you back when it is done. Right, everything is installed and ready to go. Now this shaft is some piece of scrapyard thing that I picked up, and the first time I tried to cut it, it was so hard, it was close to impossible. And so some time ago I annealed it in the coal fire, and let's see what happens. Now I don't need to cut off everything. From the moment I have here more or less 28mm or more, it's all good. A little bit more. This will work just fine. It is a terrible ship's bombardment, but it seems to work just fine. Right, I'm gonna switch tools, leave a better finish. That doesn't sound good. The finish isn't good either. Right, let's switch cutting side here. Good. I leave it 1 millimeter oversize. So first I'm gonna cut a keyway in here and then I will cut it off, or maybe first cut it off and then cut the keyway, and after I will put it in the other lathe, in the other chuck, because that's the one that goes on the dividing head, and then I will finish it off so I'm sure it is center. Of course I could cut this keyway on the shaper, but I think here on the milling machine it will be easier because it's not a slot that goes all through, it's just a little part here. All that's left to do now is reduce the diameter, the smaller diameter, to make it fit inside my future gear here. But before I do that, first I want to answer a question from Huub. And Huub, he asked me why I made my chuck adjustable. As you know, or maybe not, this chuck is held on a rim to center it. And I did cut a tiny bit of the rim inside that you can't see here to make it adjustable. If, for example, I regrind the jaws here, they will be perfectly in center, but only for the diameter that I set in, right? Now, because of there is tolerance in this scroll system, in this spiral, when I use another diameter, maybe it's not center anymore. So if I'm gonna install this part, chances are big it will not be in center. So what do? I loosen these 3 bolts here and I can adjust to make it center. And then later on, maybe I want to work this part, again another diameter, and it could well be that I need to adjust again. A second reason is also, of course, if I make a part in this chuck and later I have to install it in this chuck to do some other work on it, the chances are slim it will be perfectly center. So all I have to do, loosen the bolts, install my part of course, and I can tap it in place, and as you can see, even changing chucks, there is absolutely no run out. Perfectly center. So Huub, I hope this answered your question a little bit. Right, let's make a part here. Yes, that will work. This assembly is now ready to be bolted on the dividing head on the milling machine, and that is of course to drill holes to bolt them together. And then after I have to bring it to the lathe to cut out this circle, of course, and then bring it back over here on the milling machine and install it again on the dividing head. But all this will be for next week's video, because today is Friday, and Friday this video comes out and I have to take off the table and the support of the table and install the dividing